I didn't cheat because I was unhappy. Let's get that out of the way right now. Steph and I had a good marriage, and I did still love her. I honestly did. At 35, I was so sure I had made it. We had 2 wonderful boys, a nice house, and work was going pretty well for me. I wasn't exactly the top salesman at my little firm, but I was good enough. I was happy. It's just that happiness isn't always exciting. When I was in my 20s, I was a fucking beast. I went out clubbing, had some beers, and met quite a few girls and boys to take home. At the time, I'd thought it would have gone on forever, and yet as time slipped through my fingers and I got older, I lost everything that I was. It sounds so grimy that way, but there's really no other way to put it. College got replaced by work. Work required overtime. Clients needed attention. I met Steph and settled down. Then came the bills and the babies and the barbecues. There was no one moment when my life changed from that of a lively frat boy to that of a suburban dad. Sure, I still kept in shape. I tried to act as if I was still in my 20s, but time was not fooled. I could see the gray hairs in my beard. I was a different man. The change was gradual, but when I saw it, I found myself resenting it. I caught myself longing for a time past where I could be unchained, free to party and drink, and fuck to my heart's content. No kids, no wife, no work, no worries. It's not that I hated what I currently had. Far from it. But I wanted what I'd once had as well. The first affair had been with a coworker named Claire. She was 26. She was gorgeous and she knew it. She had the same body Steph had had when she had been that age, and I told myself that is why I'd been attracted to her. That had been a lie, though. It was nothing but sheer lust. It started out with one drunken kiss at the Christmas party. Then we'd gone bar hopping for the rest of the night, and by the time Steph had called to check in on me, my head was buried between her legs. I was ashamed of what I'd done at first, spitting in the face of a 10-year relationship with a woman I'd claimed to love. But it didn't keep me away from her. We'd kept hooking up until she quit a few months later, and the shame stopped bothering me after that. Even though I told myself I'd stop, I didn't. There were countless affairs with countless men and women who'd caught my eye. Some were just one-time hookups. Others were something longer term. Mark was my latest dirty little secret. Despite the fact that he was older than me, you wouldn't have guessed it. He was a cute Asian man with dark round plastic glasses, and a certain enthusiasm to him that really did it for me. I knew he was a married man, although I knew almost nothing about his husband. Steph had met him, of course. She had no idea that I swung both ways, and I preferred to keep it that way. Every so often, Mark and I would go out to play golf. There was an inexpensive hotel downtown we'd usually visit, and we'd spend the day together. No one was any wiser, and I was quite content having a little side piece, to let me feel as if I was still an adventurous, untamed 20-something with no consequences. So I thought, at least. Mark and I had met for golf that day, and as we finished, I admired him laying on the bed as I smoked my cigarette by the window. Mark was looking at me, still basking in the afterglow of what we'd done and smiling. "What are you grinning about?" I asked, half flirtatiously.
Happy.
Was all he said in response. His head nuzzled into the pillow as I took a drag on my smoke and looked through the curtains at the city ahead of us.
Are you busy tonight?
Mark asked, and I looked back over at him. His eyes were closed, but he was clearly still awake. "Not currently, but I can be," I replied. "Did you have something in mind?"
I was going to go clubbing tonight. Thought you might want to come.
I snuffed out my cigarette and approached Mark slowly. "That sounds nice, actually." His eyes opened as I leaned down to kiss him. He ran his fingers through my hair as our lips met.
I'm glad you think so. My husband is holding an event. It's his club, but I won't tell if you won't.
At the mention of his husband, my heart did skip a minor beat. I'd never actually met Mark's husband before, and truthfully, the idea did intimidate me a little. "He won't mind me coming?" I asked.
Not at all.
Mark sat up, smiling knowingly.
He holds events like this every now and then. Besides, don't you think it's time to meet the husband?
There was something in his voice, sultry and knowing. I took it as flirtation, assuming no other possible meaning. Besides, Mark had met my wife. So long as whoever his husband wasn't aware of our little secret, I didn't see any real risks. Besides, through all my affairs, I'd never really been back to a nightclub, and I honestly couldn't see why not. "All right," I said. "Let's go tonight then." Mark's smile widened. That knowing look in his eyes didn't fade, and I had no idea what was in store for me. I let Mark drive us to the club, and the one he pulled up to wasn't one I was familiar with, although it certainly looked fancy. The exterior was outfitted in blue and green neon, with dual wyvern logos on both sides of the door. Above it was a neon blue sign that read, "The Disco Dragon." Mark pulled up on the street as I got out, adjusting my suit. I checked my phone just to make sure Steph hadn't tried to call me or anything. I'd texted her that I'd be out late, but she hadn't responded back. I figured she was already in bed.
What do you think?
Mark asked.
Nice, huh?
Yeah? Your husband owns this place?
Among other things.
He took me by the hand, eagerly leading me to the door.
Come on, you have to meet him.
There was no cover fee. The bouncer recognized Mark and just smiled politely as he waved him in, offering only a quiet,
"Welcome back, Mr. Peterson."
The club itself was massive. The floor was glass, although the downstairs was so dark that I couldn't see what was beneath us. There was definitely something there. Through the strobe lights, I could catch glimpses of a room and several shady hallways. Mark kept hold of my hand, guiding me into the throng of dancers, where I was hit by the smell of sweat and alcohol as he led me towards a spiral staircase leading up to a balcony. I almost resented his urgency. The club looked like the kind of place I wanted to explore, yet I still followed Mark, letting him lead me up the stairs to where 3 men waited. 2 of them were burly figures, dressed in all neat black suits. Clearly, they were just security for the 3rd man, who radiated an air of importance to him. He was tall and wore a crimson blazer with a black shirt underneath. In the hazy neon light, I could see that he had kindly eyes and a warm smile. His hair was neatly combed back in sandy brown. His chin was covered in a light stubble. "Evan Parker," he said softly. There was an accent to his voice that I found difficult to place. Swedish, perhaps. He offered me a hand to shake. "Mark's spoken very highly of you. I'm Bjorn Peterson. It's a pleasure to finally meet you." He had a firm handshake that pulled me in just a little. He greeted Mark with a kiss before his eyes returned to me. "Please sit. Consider yourself a guest. Can I get you a drink?" Yeah. A drink would be nice. A rye and ginger, please." Bjorn nodded at one of the burly security team around him, who left to fetch me my drink as I sat down in one of the cushy chairs on the balcony. From where we were, I could see the Disco Dragon laid out before me. This club was nicer than any I'd been in before. A throng of people danced on the floor below to electronic music. On one wall was a sculpture of a human head. Water trickled out of the eyes like tears into a fountain below, and I could see countless gorgeous women dressed in bikinis dancing in the water. I caught myself checking them out before stopping myself, lest I appear lecherous in front of my generous host. Speaking of my host, clearly Bjorn had money, and I found it a little hard to believe that Mark had been cheating on this guy with me of all people. Looking at Mark and his husband sitting together, they looked happy as they spoke in a low voice that I couldn't hear over the music. Although once they realized that I was looking at them, Bjorn smiled at me. "Have you been a patron of the Disco Dragon before?" he asked. "No, never. Your club is beautiful, though." "Thank you. It's been a passion project of mine for quite some time. We've grown this little club from a niche hole in the wall into something truly special. My associates and I are quite proud of what we have. I personally strive for excellence in every aspect of my life, business, pleasure, and the company I keep." He looked at Mark with a knowing smile. "What about you, Mr. Parker?" "I just get through one day at a time," I replied. From the corner of my eye, I saw the security guard coming back with a tray full of drinks. Martinis for Mark and Bjorn, along with a rye and ginger for myself. "Sometimes that's all we can do," Bjorn said. He toasted me with his glass before taking a sip. Mark did the same. "I'll drink to that," I said softly as I knocked back my drink. He took out his phone, checking a message he'd just received. His smile widened slightly before he looked over at me again. "Why don't you and Mark go down and dance? I would join you, but the event will be starting soon," he said.
Now that's not a bad idea. How about it, handsome?
Mark's voice was half teasing and half sincere. I polished off my drink before standing up. "That sounds great, actually." Mark took me by the hand and led me down the spiral stairs. As soon as we were down, I saw someone else going up. Another man in a dark suit, who glanced at me before he ascended.
Why don't we find ourselves a little corner first?
Mark whispered to me. He kept a tight hold on my hand, leading me through the dancers towards the bar. "Here?" I asked.
Why not? Bjorn's office is empty. He's got a really sturdy desk in there.
This seemed almost like some form of sacrilege that Mark was suggesting, and yet he had my undivided attention. I wasn't going to say no to him. He led me through a small unmarked door beside the bar. The music was more muffled so we could hear each other better, as he led me to a small office off to the side. Bjorn's office was tidier than I had expected an office to be. There was a closed laptop on the desk, and as promised, a sturdy desk on the far side of the room. Mark was kissing me as soon as we were on the other side of the door and pulling me over to that desk. My mind was a haze of blind lust and endorphins. Whatever was going to happen would happen, and I didn't give much of a damn one way or another. As we passed the desk, Mark pressed me up against the wall as I started undoing his pants. He put his hands on my wrist, stopping me before he pulled back ever so slightly. "What's wrong?" I asked.
Sorry, Evan. It's been fun. It really has,
he said, although his voice didn't hold much remorse. I felt the wall behind me vanish, and Mark pushed me backwards. I felt my body tilt as I fell into the unknown, my eyes wide and my mouth frozen in a silent scream. Darkness swallowed me whole.
Hey, wake up.
Someone was shaking me. My world was dark and blurry, but in the low neon light, I could see the face of a man just inches from my own.
Jesus, is he dead?
Someone else asked.
Just leave him,
said a third voice, this one female. My eyes opened. The man in front of my face had dark hair, dark skin, and a messy beard. He looked to be in his mid-20s. "What the fuck? Where am I? Where's Mark?"
I don't know who that is. Come on, get up.
He pulled me to my feet.
What's your name, man?
"Evan," I said softly. "Evan Parker."
Well, I wish we were meeting under better circumstances, Evan. Name's Rick. Rick Jones.
As my eyes adjusted to the dim light, I could make out 4 other figures aside from myself and Rick. 3 men and 1 woman. Rick gave me a quick round of introductions, although I couldn't say I particularly gave a shit about anyone else in that moment. There was Steve, a scrawny little bastard who wore horn-rimmed glasses. He paced recklessly, muttering to himself like a goddamn lunatic. Sitting in one corner was an older businessman named Warren. The one who asked if I was dead was Freddy. He was a young, skeezy-looking bastard who looked as if he was high on something. Then standing on the far side of the room, examining the walls for some sign of a door, was Kara. She was clearly a gym rat who'd probably hit the steroids a little too hard. She almost seemed ready to tear out of her little party dress like the goddamn Hulk. She had bleached blonde hair cut into a shorter soccer mom style. "What the fuck?" I murmured.
Yeah, that's what I said,
Rick replied.
I've only been down here for an hour or so. Steve here, though, says he's been down here for a couple of days. I'm gonna guess it's your first time at the Disco Dragon, right? Someone took you to the office and pushed you down here?
I paused before nodding. "How did you—"
That's how we all got down here.
Kara growled, looking over at me.
I came here when this place opened with my boyfriend, and he threw me into this fucking pit.
Her fists were clenched in rage, and I caught a glimpse of a wedding ring on her finger. Steve and Freddy had a girlfriend bring them here. Same with me. Not sure how Warren got down here, but if I had to guess... Warren glanced at us before staying in his corner, continuing to look pensive.
They're planning something.
Steve murmured.
They're going to do something to us. I just fucking know it. I should have trusted my gut. I should have stayed the fuck home. Jesus.
Rick ignored him, although his grim stare told me that he agreed with Steve, even if he didn't want to admit it. I just kept looking around the room, replaying the events that had led me here in my mind, and trying to wrap my head around what was happening. Then I heard Bjorn's voice, booming over an intercom. "Ladies, gentlemen, and those of us who've yet to decide, the time is now. We've chosen our contestants, and this year's labyrinth is bigger and better than ever. So now I welcome you to the Disco Dragon's annual obstacle course. Please, if you have not already placed your bets, now is the time to place them at the bar. And without any further ado, let's introduce this year's contestants." A wall on the far side of the room disappeared. It was part of the corner Warren had been sitting in, and with no more corner, the poor man collapsed backwards. I would have found it funny if I wasn't so outright afraid. "Ah, and here is our first new contestant. Welcome, Detective Andrew Warren. You may remember Detective Warren as the man who's been trying to ruin our little game. Thankfully, I have friends in very high places who have arranged for his candidacy in this year's festivities. Give the good detective a round of applause." I could hear people clapping and cheering, and looking up at the ceiling, my heart skipped a beat as I saw the club above us. I remembered the glass floor from upstairs, and my stomach churned as I realized it had been looking down onto this. "Ah, and there is our next contestant, hand-picked by my lovely husband himself. Welcome Evan Parker, a businessman with a family he left behind to philander and club. What a naughty boy." Bjorn chuckled coldly before he introduced the rest of the contestants. Rick Jones, Kara Armstrong, Freddie Lawrence, and Steve Balkin. He gave a little summary on all of them, but honestly, I was barely paying attention. Through the glass, I could see Bjorn looking down on us, with Mark at his side, grinning widely from ear to ear as his eyes met mine.
What the actual fuck is this?
Freddie snapped up at the ceiling.
Let us go. Now. I swear to God, my guys will come looking for you. You hear me?
"Idle threats will get you nowhere, my friend," Bjorn warned.
You wouldn't want me to suspend your precious prize, would you? Speaking of which, while our lovely audience knows what we are playing for, our wonderful contestants do not. You see, my friends, to offer you an incentive to play our little game, I've arranged for the captivity of those you hold dearest to your heart. Spouses, children, lovers, parents.
A TV screen came to life and showed a camera panning across a line of bound figures. Most of them I didn't recognize, but from the silence around me, I knew that the other contestants did. It wasn't until I saw Steph's face, wet with fresh tears, that I felt my knees go weak. They had her. Jesus Christ, I saw my two boys beside her, bound, gagged, and terrified, just as she was. No, I said under my breath, still caught in my own disbelief. The screen went dark just a moment later as Bjorn continued to speak.
Simply put, your job is to solve our little labyrinth. Make it through to the other side, and your loved ones will be let go. Fail, and they will be disposed of.
His generally friendly tone held a darker inflection that sent a shiver down my spine.
The clock is ticking, my friends. To the audience, I'll ask you to place your bets. To the contestants, good luck.
A heavy silence settled over those of us unlucky enough to be caught in this hellish game. Looking at the others, I saw that Rick had a blank, shell-shocked expression on his face. Kara's brow was furrowed in frustration that masked fear, while Warren just stared hatefully up at the audience above us.
We need to just fucking go.
Freddie murmured.
We need to get out of this fucking place.
His head was darting from side to side. I'd seen a woman who'd looked a lot like him, albeit older, on the screen before. Probably his mother. I knew what he had to lose.
Let's just go then,
Rick said. His voice was shaking. Looking ahead, there were 3 different hallways lit with neon blue available to us, and he started down the middle one.
Wait,
Warren cried before Rick could get too far. He'd almost ventured down one of the halls before Warren had grabbed his shoulder. He'd done so just in time. Jets of flames erupted from the walls of the hallway that Rick had almost gone down, and only barely missed him.
Jesus,
Rick cried as he stumbled backwards.
This place is a death trap,
Warren warned.
That's what they do. They make people run their sick little gauntlet for kicks. We need to play it very, very safe right now. Are you shitting me?
Freddie snapped.
Fuck this. Fuck this, man. I'm out.
He backed towards another hall, and Warren fixed him in a piercing gaze.
Don't move. No, I didn't sign up for this shit, man. I'm getting out of here.
Perhaps it was simple Darwinism at that point. If he'd been smart, Freddie wouldn't have moved. Instead, he tried to run down the hallway to the right. Wait, I called, as I ran up behind him, but I was too slow. Freddie was already staring at the dead end ahead of him, offering a disappointing anticlimax to his great escape. There was something waiting at the end of that dead end, though. At a glance, I didn't recognize it at first. It wasn't until it launched something at Freddie that I put the pieces together. The projectile struck Freddie in the chest before exploding. The blast knocked me off my feet and left nothing but splashes of chunky meat and scattered limbs where the man had stood moments ago.
Wow, what terrible luck,
Bjorn called from the intercom, although I could barely hear him through the ringing in my ears.
It seems Freddie has run foul of a grenade launcher, and so early, too. What a shame.
I stared wide-eyed at the chunky mess that had once been a human being, my heart racing in my chest. I couldn't move. I couldn't think. I couldn't focus. It took me a few moments to realize that the audience above us had been laughing. A man had been murdered, and they thought it was funny. I'd never seen anyone die before, and a sudden grenade seemed so, well, sudden. One moment you existed, the next you didn't. Had Freddy even known what had killed him?
Parker, get up.
The feel of Warren's hand on my shoulder snapped me back to reality, and I let him pull me up and bring me back to the others, although my mind was elsewhere.
Let's just keep going,
he said. I could see a look of pure disgust on Kara's face. Steve looked pale and ready to pass out.
One hall left,
Warren said.
Any volunteers?
I'll go, Rick said softly. He closed his eyes, then exhaled. He didn't want to go, I knew that much. He also didn't seem to have much of a choice. I leaned on Warren for support as Rick slowly started down the hall. No sudden trap sprung out of nowhere to kill him. Rick looked back at us, silently giving us the all clear to proceed. I went next, followed by Warren, Kara, and Steve. We moved slowly, making each step deliberate. At every crossroads, we chose our path carefully. Taking things slow and steady seemed to be the right move. I saw more dead ends with guns, grenade launchers, or other more obvious traps, and I almost got to thinking that maybe, if we were smart, we might just be all right.
This one,
Warren had said. We'd reached a crossroads, and he gestured to a hall that seemed to go on for a while. There were no obvious traps in place, and no one was dumb enough to question him. He went first, of course, with the rest of us in tow behind him. When I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet, though, I felt a familiar, uneasy feeling in my stomach return.
The floor's opening,
Rick cried, and he was exactly right. Sections of the floor were being pulled into the walls, leaving only a few small freestanding platforms for us to safely stand on.
Find a safe spot,
Warren ordered, and I could see Kara and Rick had already done so. Steve seemed to be trying to do the same. Trying. I could see him losing his balance, and I knew that he was going to fall.
Parker, don't move,
Warren snapped, but I didn't care. Using the last bits of the floor before it vanished completely, I leapt over to Steve's platform. He was already falling backwards, but I grabbed him by the arm. In the pit beneath us, I could see dark, writhing shapes. It took me a moment to realize that they were snakes. Steve screamed at the sight of them, and over the intercom I could hear Bjorn laughing. "A stellar save from Evan," he said. "What camaraderie! Will this be the first time we see multiple winners?" "I've got you," I said to Steve, as I pulled him back up onto the platform we were on. Up ahead, I could see Warren leaping to another platform just ahead of him. He looked back at us, as if confirming we were okay before gesturing for us to follow.
Come on,
he called. "Can you make the jump?" I asked Steve. He hesitated before slowly nodding. The platforms weren't spaced that far apart. It shouldn't have been hard, even for him. I let him make the jump and watched as he landed safely on the next platform, then the next one before I followed him. My heart was racing, but we were still alive. We just needed to keep that up. As the last of us reached the end of the pit of snakes, we found ourselves in a large round room. There were 3 closed doors and a small panel with 3 corresponding buttons. "Mark and I have been quite excited about this little update to our festivities," Bjorn said. "The rules here are simple. 1 door is an exit. 1 will grant you an advantage, and the last one has a live tiger behind it, who will eat you if you let him out. Open whichever door you see fit. Good luck." Warren looked up through the glass ceiling, at the faces eagerly looking down at us. Mark had come down to join them, and playfully waved at me when I looked at him.
So, which door has the tiger?
Kara asked quietly. She studied all 3, as if she expected it to be obvious.
Let's just hit all 3 and run,
Rick said.
We can ditch the tiger, right? Maybe there's some trap up ahead that can finish him off. No,
Warren said.
that's too much of a risk. Let's just stop and think here.
He studied the doors before looking at the panel. At a glance, each button should have opened the corresponding door. But given our situation, I couldn't imagine that was fully accurate.
Just hit them all and run.
Steve said, and Warren looked over at him.
Can you just wait a minute? All right?
They have my fucking daughter.
Steve snapped.
We don't have a goddamn minute.
You think you're the only one here with something to lose?
Anger had crept into Warren's voice.
Look, I understand you're scared, but panic will not get us through this. But if we keep taking it slow, if we plan our moves, maybe we can...
Something scratched at the middle door, and I heard an eager snarl from behind it. I guess that told us where the tiger was.
Great, can we just go?
Steve snapped.
We don't open the middle door. That means it has to be either the left or right. So let's just...
Wait!
Warren cried, but Steve had already hit the button that should have opened the right side door. Instead, the middle door opened. Warren didn't have time to react before about 400 pounds of starving tiger was on top of him. He screamed, but only for a moment before its fangs tore open his throat. Kara shrank back, while Rick rushed towards Warren in a desperate bid to save him. Steve remained immobilized in front of the buttons, too scared to move or react. He didn't say a word as I threw him out of the way and hit the other two buttons. Both doors opened, one revealing an exit, and the other one revealing a pedestal with a handgun on it. Rick cried out in pain as the tiger turned on him. It batted at him, raking its claws across his face and tearing open the flesh as it let out a furious snarl. I ran for the gun, snatching it off its pedestal and taking aim at the tiger in front of us. Beneath it, I could see that Warren was already dead. Rick was still moving, though. He might have still had a chance. The tiger's golden eyes fixated on me before I fired the gun straight into its head. The animal recoiled, frightened by the noise and the pain, but I didn't stop shooting. Even as it pulled away from Warren's body, I emptied the clip into it, piercing its hide and watching as the tiger drunkenly swayed. It growled at me through the pain. Blood dripped from its fur, and as the gun clicked, its ammo spent, I felt a growing dread that what I'd done wasn't enough. The tiger's legs trembled beneath it, but it didn't come for me. Instead, it just collapsed onto its side, exhaling blood as it did. Its chest rose and fell a few final times before it went still. Silence filled the room, but it didn't last long. I ran for Rick's prone form on the ground, rolling him onto his back to see the damage. I'd known the man for less than an hour, but he'd been the closest thing to a friend I'd made since I ended up in this bleak fucking situation. Rick sucked in a rasping breath. His cheek had been torn open, exposing bloody teeth. There was a deep gash in his throat, and looking at it made me want to vomit. Still, I did everything I could for him. "I got you, buddy," I murmured. I took off my suit jacket and tried to use the sleeve to stop the bleeding. No luck. Rick was bleeding out and fast. I couldn't stop it. I couldn't save him. No, I murmured under my breath as I felt Rick slipping away. His body went still, and just like that, the number of corpses and survivors in the room became equal. The silence should have returned, mournful and heavy, but above us I could hear the cheers of the audience and Bjorn's upbeat announcement. "What a thrill! A spectacular fight with our late beloved tiger, and a poor final stand for Detective Warren. Oh well, did we catch that on video? Can we replay the highlights, please?" With my teeth gritted, I looked up at the audience. Mark was still amongst them, but he wasn't paying me any mind now. My attention turned to Steve next. "He told you to wait," I growled.
I'm sorry. I
"He
didn't.
told you to wait." I grabbed Steve by the shirt, ready to beat the living shit out of the man. "What part of wait did you not fucking understand?" Steve didn't respond. Crocodile tears streamed down his cheeks, and Kara stood beside us, silent and grim.
We should go.
She said softly.
Since Steve didn't want to wait, he can lead the way.
Steve looked at her, wide-eyed and stammering to protest. Kara didn't want to hear it. She grabbed him away from me and pushed him toward the door.
You were eager enough to go get 2 men killed, so go.
She growled. Steve looked at her, frozen in fear, before he closed his eyes and began his advance, with Kara right behind him. I looked down at Ricky's body, then at Warren's before I followed. This game hadn't even lasted half an hour, and I was already more exhausted than I'd ever been in my life. Steve stammered his way through, leading us through the maze, although we went a few good minutes without hitting any traps.
Left.
He murmured at a fork in the road, and Kara pushed him forwards. He made it about 3 steps before several dark pulls shot out of the wall. They slammed Steve's corpse against the opposite end of the hallway, impaling him in several places, but not quite killing him. The suddenness of his death made me recoil a step, but Kara stood calmly, watching as Steve died.
I guess we're going right.
She said tonelessly. I could hear Steve's shuddering final breaths as the spikes that had wounded him retreated back into the wall. They brought him with them until they retreated fully into their sheaths, scraping Steve's body off of them like rubbish. He collapsed into the hallway, a pool of his own blood and piss growing around him as his eyes fixated on me. I turned away. I didn't hate him. I didn't know him enough to hate him, but I couldn't bring myself to care either. At the end of the right-hand hall was a square room. The door behind us closed once I joined Kara inside. There was clearly another door waiting for us, but it was obviously closed. "You're nearing the end of our little challenge," Bjorn said from the intercom. "Now it's time for our final major event. Only one person can proceed from this point on. The other will not survive. Kara Armstrong and Evan Parker, it's time to decide which one of you will leave this room alive. Perhaps one of you will opt for a noble sacrifice, a chance to redeem yourself for your sins. Or perhaps you'd prefer a more entertaining method of choosing. I'll offer one little incentive. If one of you dies in combat, I'll set your spouse free. How's that? It's something to think about, isn't it?" Kara stared up at the glass ceiling, hanging onto Bjorn's every word. I saw her muscles tense. She looked over at me. I knew what was coming the moment before it actually came. With one sweep of her hand, she sent me to the ground. I felt her grabbing me by the shirt and driving a massive fist into my face. Above us, the audience cheered. Kara hadn't said a word. She really didn't need to. We both knew the stakes, and fear can be a powerful motivator. At the end of the day, we were strangers, and people we swore we loved were on the line. I understood. My ears were ringing again as Kara hit me. I felt her hands around my throat, starting to squeeze the life out of me. The look on her face wasn't one of anger or fury. There was a visceral fear there. She knew exactly what she was doing, and yet she dreaded it.
Sorry.
I heard her say. But I had something on the line too. I grabbed her by the head and drove my thumbs into her eyes. Kara let out a pained scream. Her hands left my throat as she tried to pull my hands away from her face, but the damage was done. Blood gushed out of her empty eye sockets in the moment before she pushed me away. She stumbled across the room, panting heavily and covering her face. I stood up, weakly. I didn't want to kill this woman, but I knew that I had to. And in that moment, that was all the motivation I needed. Desperation does funny things to a person. I approached Kara and grabbed her by the hair, forcing her to the ground. She tried to push me off of her, but I punished her with a punch to the stomach. In terms of raw power, she had me beat, but I was smarter than she was. When she was doubled over, I got behind her. I climbed onto her back, wrapping my arms around her neck and beginning to squeeze. Kara struggled, trying to loosen my grip on her, but I wrapped my legs around her torso, keeping a firm grip on her as I choked her. She threw herself backwards, landing on her back and crushing me, forcing me to release my grip. In an instant, Kara was back on her feet. Her fist rocketed down toward my face, catching me in the jaw and slamming the back of my head against the floor. She went in for another blind, furious punch, just as I desperately kicked at her knee. I heard a bone break, and I heard Kara yelp in pain. Again I grabbed her, forcing her to the ground and getting on her back to keep choking her. Like animals, we writhed as we fought. Kara reached behind her. Her nails raked my scalp in some desperate attempt to hurt me, as my arms tightened around her throat, squeezing the life out of her. Kara kicked. She thrashed and squirmed. Growls of fury turned into desperate whimpers as she realized she was losing. Just like me, she was scared, and I understood. Tears streamed from my eyes as I murdered her. And as I felt her struggles ceasing and her body shutting down, I felt no triumph. All I felt was a hollow emptiness as I debated whether or not it would be better to let Kara go and let her kill me, or to live with what I'd done. Maybe if I'd been a better man, I would have done that. Yet in the end, I remained selfish. I didn't let go until Kara stopped moving. She lay on top of me, her struggles growing weaker. Her dress was rumpled, and she'd lost her shoes in the fight. She was gone, and I was the last man standing. The cheer of the assembled crowd didn't make me feel any better about what I'd done. It didn't take away the hollow dread. As I stood up, dizzy, covered in sweat and blood, I just wanted to leave. I could hear machinery grinding around me, and saw the walls had started to close in. This bothered me less than it should have. Swaying drunkenly, I approached the door on the far end of the room. A panel in the wall had opened beside it, revealing a button. I reached out to press it before I heard Bjorn's voice again.
Outstanding. Truly outstanding. We are down to our finalist, Evan Parker. Ah, my Mark always had such a wonderful eye for contenders. I'll make this quick, Mr. Parker, as the walls are quite literally closing in on you. If you press that button, you will progress to our final room and have your shot at victory. However, victory comes at a cost. Press that button, and I will release one of your children into this little gauntlet here.
My hand paused over the button. My heart raced. The walls were pushing Kara's corpse along the floor. If I pushed that button, it would be the same as sacrificing one of my kids to death, right? Yet I still wanted to press it. I wanted to be free of this nightmare.
The clock is ticking, Mr. Parker. What will you choose?
I remained frozen, unable to act. Killing Kara was one thing. She was a stranger, but damning one of my own kids? The walls were getting closer to me, bound to crush me if I didn't press the button, and I realized that it was me or one of my children. The maze was safer, right? I'd killed the tiger. The traps hadn't been that hard to avoid. My kids were smart. They could do it. Steph would understand, right? I closed my eyes. I pressed the button, and the door in front of me opened. I ran through it, trying not to think on what I'd done, yet it was hard not to. The room I found myself in was little more than a narrow hallway. A door with exit written in neon above it was on one side, and a small pit of metal spikes was on the other. I approached the door slowly before grasping the doorknob. Just a slight movement had been enough to force it open. A torrent of water flooded out towards the pit of spikes, nearly taking me with it. I clung to the door, though, holding steadfast as the water drained. The final trap had gone off, and I'd survived. After everything the Disco Dragon had thrown at me, I was still alive.
And he's done it,
Bjorn called over the intercom.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have our winner, Mr. Parker. You have done a spectacular job. Now come to the next room. Your prize awaits.
The room beyond was still dripping with water, and above me, I could see a shimmering pool and the blurry outline of the fountain. The door closed behind me as I stepped inside, and a TV screen came to life.
You've done a wonderful job surviving, Mr. Parker, but now our time is at an end. As you can see, your wife and one of your children will be spared going into the labyrinth for our encore tomorrow night.
As he spoke, I saw the bound figures on the screen again, loved ones of those who had died in the labyrinth. I watched as men in suits dragged them off screen, along with one of my sons, my youngest. Steph and my oldest were not taken, though. As another man entered the room, I thought for a moment that he might set them free. Instead, all I could do was watch as he produced a gun and pressed it to the back of Steph's head. "No!" I cried, but it was too late. One shot, and she was gone. As the man moved to stand behind my son next, I couldn't watch. All I could do was scream impotently as tears filled my eyes. All this, everything I'd gone through, everything I'd suffered, it was all for nothing. Steph was dead. One of my children was dead, and I'd condemned the other to die, all in the name of my own survival. As water began to flood the room, I barely noticed.
You played a good game.
I heard Mark say over the intercom.
I'm glad I picked you, Evan. Like I said, you were a lot of fun while you lasted.
Sinking to my knees in the rising water, all I could do was weep. As I heard Bjorn begin to take bets on how much longer I'd live, all I could do was wonder if things would have turned out better if I'd been faithful. If I hadn't ignored the good things I had in my life in pursuit of my youth. I suppose it was too late to know, though. There's no undoing what's been done. Hey guys and ladies, thanks for watching. Send your story or creepypasta to the email in the description. My merch, Patreon, Instagram, Twitter, and Discord are down there too. Come follow me on social media. Or don't. Man, that was a long ass read. My mouth is tired. But I really liked that story. I love the whole going through all that and then it didn't matter. I love movies where it's not a happy ending. Because that gets tired, and that's not how it is. You know, it's like every movie is, oh, and then life was perfect and blah blah blah. No, it's that's not what happens. So, anyway, let me know how you felt about the story. All right, I love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. And remember to be good to animals Even people, see ya.
Já, snemma, bergsbis, hreish,